Hello everybody and welcome to the Unity in Diversity panel, the future of content discovery, personalization and the TV user experience. I have an amazing panel here today. So we are going to look at content discovery, personalization and TV UX from both an implementation point of view for businesses and also from the viewer experience point of view as well. You may remember me from the last panel. I'm still here. I didn't leave. My name is Claire McHugh. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Axonista. We're an interactive video commerce company based in Dublin, Ireland, and New York. And so we'll go around the room here, and we'll let people know who's here. And can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and the context that you bring to this topic as well? Gabriel, we'll start with you. Have you got a microphone? Do you need mine? How you going?
Oh, thank you. Hi, I'm Gabriel Berger, Capricorn. What else can I tell you? Long walks on the beach I like. So I'm the CEO of a company called ThinkAnalytics, and ThinkAnalytics is really in the thrust of the content discovery space. So we do 2 billion recommendations a day in 41 languages on many, many different devices. And what we're learning more and more is that recommendation is only the tip of the spear. It's all about the now what and how you really start to get insights into what you're starting to look for. So that's my spiel.
Hi, my name is Jonathan. I'm the CEO and co-founder of a company called Applicaster. We're based out of the US, London and Tel Aviv. And we deal with last mile distribution for media companies, which means not only delivering the consumer applications, but also thinking about the interoperability of all the different components and different pieces of this strategy. And it would be very interesting to go into discussing how multiple elements can contribute to a discovery journey and not necessarily a discovery experience. And I think there's a difference that's worth going over today.
Hey, my name is David. I'm the founder of a company called Reelgood. We're a consumer-facing company, and basically what we do for consumers is we put all their streaming services in one place. It kind of came from the frustration of flipping between Netflix, Showtime, Hulu, HBO on a nightly basis. So what our platform does is it lets our users, basically it's universal discovery, recommendations within that, as well as track and view all the content that they have based on their streaming bundle.
My name is Kurt Mickle. I run marketing for SeaChange International. We're a 25-year-old startup in the OTT space. Now, seriously, we've been doing content management and ad insertion and basically control and management of video systems, primarily in MSOs and cable systems, for quite some time now. And we're uniquely focusing right now on what I call the personalization pipeline, from the content all the way to the viewer. And we like to think that the future is all about individual experiences.
I am the co-founder and CEO of Iris TV. My name is Garthwaite, Taurus. And Iris TV is a video programming personalization platform. What that means is we have lightweight APIs that plug anywhere into the technology stack. So easy to integrate with CMS, video player, ad server. And what it does, it creates a great user experience for the end user and really empowers decision makers from sales to editorial to product to have tools to then improve the user experience and then use insights to essentially make better decisions. So we prefer the term augmented intelligence over AI, but really it's just all about workflow tools that have made the companies like Google, Facebook, Netflix, and Amazon so successful in this market and providing that to broadcasters.
I'm Dewey Reid, and I've been about 45 years in designing UIs and also entertainment properties. I've worked for huge companies and worked for small companies. I worked for Microsoft, Yahoo, and most recently just CNN, and we took CNN from 2 platforms, which is a website and an app, to 32 platforms within 2 years, which is insane.
That is insane. I'm a Leo, by the way, just to add to this constellation that's up here. So, when I think of good personalization, to me, from a user experience, I look to my streaming music apps, right? So I think music streaming has figured a lot of stuff out that I think the TV industry could learn from. And my favorite thing from Spotify, which I pay for and use, is Discover Weekly, which is this playlist that I get every Monday morning and has tunes that Spotify thinks I will be interested in. But what makes it work for me is that, and the reason I pay attention to it is because I feel like my listening habits have informed it. I feel like I've made the decision of those recommendations. I feel they belong to me. It's not like somebody telling me, because I'm a Leo. Remember, I don't like people telling me what to do. So, it's not like somebody saying, this is what we think you like. This is like, oh, this is something that your listening habits have informed. So I'll start with you, Gabriel, and we go around. There's a lot of people here, but we'll go around everybody. It's really, what do you think is the key thing the secret to a good personalized recommendation?
It's a great question, and I think this was maybe touched upon a little bit by Ethan yesterday. We're talking a lot. I think we're getting a little too enamored by banning about AI, machine learning, all very, very important. Algorithms are formulaic. They're designed by human beings. Human beings have biases. That's just the way it is. We can have a larger overarching conversation about societally what that really portends. But it's really about, before you start, to set up the learn actions of what you're trying to learn. And so this makes for better personalization. This is what it's really all about. It's about the planning and deciding, if you're Netflix, maybe the key metric is what's in queue, not what's watched. If it's in queue, you're probably not churning. Right, so what do you want to do? Why am I personalizing something for you? If I see in a learn action, you don't watch anything more than 27 minutes. Why am I proffering up a movie for you to watch? Right, so I think it's about that, a lot of planning and tribal knowledge and mistakes that have to be kind of galvanized into the whole personalized experience to really make it work.
So you're coming at personalization from a what's next to watch point of view. Is that?
Yeah, we all do item similarity. You watch this, you watch this. Frankly, I think as an industry, some of the knobs and dials I sold like 6 years ago are still not being used, right? So it's not an algorithm, it's about the people in this room that at least can intuitively, at some point, justify with some empirical metric to personalize things.
And I'd love to comment just on the assumption that you made in the question itself, which is so important, I think, to recognize and to double click on, because we say that companies need to think what is the desired outcome before they start doing something, but it almost brings the understanding they have to ask, who am I in this? Because when you mention Spotify, you're already making the assumption of a huge consolidation that happened in the music market. So when we're talking about music recommendations, we're obviously looking at iTunes Music, Spotify, Pandora, services that went and consolidated. And I think we've been in this for fairly a long time, and we've always thrived off the fact that TV broadcasters or media companies are independent distribution properties. That gives us several customers and also gives the consumer choice. And I think because of the size of the media business that they run, unlike music that was a rights business, it's harder to consolidate. And there were times in our past as an industry that we thought Netflix is going to go around and license from everybody and it's going to be the new cable company. And as a company, we always assumed that Netflix will actually go after broadcast and become a competitor as a broadcaster, which is what's happening. So Netflix basically is now producing their own content more than they're licensing, and they are considered more a threat that way. So I think when we talk about personalization and a good recommendation, I think it's a completely different question when we're asking it in the shoes of Netflix, Hulu, or somebody or even a cable company, somebody who's looking at an operator play, multiple sources, or somebody who's trying to develop their destination. And then there are other tools that maybe we go into later on, but I just wanted to comment that as an important observation.
So what makes a good recommendation for you, for Jonathan? Like, what do you really enjoy?
Well, I have an interesting experience that just started. I'm a Gemini. My birthday was 2 weeks ago, and it has relevance here. And so for my birthday, as unromantic as it sounds, I got from my kids also an electrical toothbrush, a new brown it's a brown Oral-B toothbrush. It streams the weather, the toothbrush. That's a great recommendation. So, and it's kind of freaky. We have several Alexas around our house. We have the Philips Hue. We're not crazy. We don't, my locks aren't synced, or we didn't invest a lot in it, but It just happened organically with the consumer trend. And now my toothbrush, which I thought was a cool thing, measures the time that I brush my teeth, and it tells me brush here, brush there. And the first thing it did is that it told me to subscribe on an Amazon Dash service for the replacement. Okay, so that's great, and and then the next thing that happened was that it told me the weather. It literally, it spoke the weather to me. And then it came from the Weather Channel. And then the next thing it did is it gave me a news recap. And then the next day it asked me to mark the topics that I'm interested in, and it edited a bite-sized news edition of 2 minutes. Now, Reuters tried to do the same thing on Apple TV. They told you, download our app, then say how much time you have, then I don't think it's as successful as this because they know I have 2 minutes because I'm brushing the teeth the way they want me to, and now they're feeding me the news that they chose to feed me.
Do they do that in the morning or in the evening or both?
The news comes in the morning and the evening, and the weather comes only in the morning, and I noted that. And I don't know if I'm going to teach it to be more personal to me. I don't know to what extent it goes to, but to answer your question concisely, I think vertically integrated ecosystems provide effective recommendations. This is how Amazon got to 20% market share on baby wipes. Because I'm asking Amazon for baby wipes, and then they're giving me the ones that they want me to wipe with. So I think SEO it's not dead, but for media and for our habits, SEO doesn't build a habit. SEO helps me find, that's why cooking shows are so successful, because when I'm looking for lemon meringue pie, there's a lot of metadata that's developed in the cooking segment because there's ingredients and occasions and a lot of things, but for entertainment, for the voice, that doesn't work. So something has to come and take me throughout the day. So I think that companies that are, and in your previous session you mentioned a show, you were discussing a show that was on Saturday and then it had to have another segment on Wednesday. In those instances where a company is taking me through my day when I'm not on their platform, when I'm just thinking about something else, that's when the recommendation for me is very successful. When I'm watching The Crown, I understand that you can recommend something else, but I'll probably watch the next episode, and when I'm done, I'm gonna be sad.
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a couple things at play. Like, one of the things with Spotify is that they have pretty much most of the music out there. Whereas when you compare that to things like Netflix, like you were saying, I mean, they have effectively all these streaming services. This is purely for the on-demand side of the world, but they have, for the most part, exclusive content, and that's how they drive subscribers, is we have stuff the other guy doesn't have, so you sign up for that. So I think recommendations, when it comes to on-demand sources, is being relatively limited, just given the content libraries are relatively small. There's only so much you can do with, let's call it even Amazon, or Netflix rather, that has maybe 1,000 pieces of content. HBO is, I think, somewhere around 200, maybe being generous. So there's just only so much you can work with. And I think the other thing is people have kind of stumbled in the past where when it's come to recommendations, they've looked at, there's just so much metadata out there. And you're saying like a show like The Crown, if I recommend other things, England and monarchy and other elements to it, and I think humans are a lot more complex than that. I think we don't like specific genres. Like I know I watch action movies and comedy and I love The Crown, and it's like just showing me more monarchy stuff, I'm probably not gonna like that. It's actually more complicated. So I think when it comes to recommendations, it's really about looking at what other viewers are watching that have a similar viewing history to yourself or that user, and using that to inform what you recommend to them.
Do you sometimes feel insulted by recommendations?
I think they're just bad most of the time. I just don't look at them, yeah.
Well, actually, you get, especially you make a good point about like a small library, you get recommendation fatigue. It's like, I get it, I'll watch The Crown, I get it. So that's what you have to be careful too. Again, with learn actions is like, if no one's taking your recommendation, that should be noted and analyzed.
So, how many of you have ever received a gift that you never would have expected to receive? Like it's not anything that you ever would have thought of, but when you received it from a friend or a family member, you thought it was amazing. You thought it was great. We've all had a lot of us.
This is about to turn into Oprah here.
Yeah, I know. And by the way, I'm a Scorpio. So the idea, so what I look at and what I think about, where do we want this to go, is I would love to be able to go up to the device, whatever viewing device that I'm using, and say, put something good on. And that device knows not only my past history, but also my interests, right? It's truly a big data problem, taking what it knows about me socially from my viewing history, what it knows about where I am in my day. So the context of time, right, is really important, because if I generally go to bed on weeknights at 10 o'clock and it's 9:30 and I want to see what I want to watch, it really shouldn't show me a 2-hour movie, right? It should know. And that's, this is not science fiction, right? This is we could figure this out. But on a Friday night or a Saturday night, hey, maybe I'll watch something longer. And hey, if I'm sitting on the couch with my wife, put something good on means something completely different than if I'm sitting there by myself. So it has a lot to do with the system, the agent, the concierge, knowing me and trying to understand or predict from a really large data set what it is that would interest me, right? Maybe I play guitar and I'm interested in woodworking, but my hands don't really do a good job of it. But seeing a documentary on a luthier, that's a guitar maker, maybe that would be really interesting to me. I mean, who would know that, but maybe a best friend of mine who could make that recommendation to me. So I think when we talk about context is a really big problem. And whether we solve it with machine learning, AI, right, it doesn't really matter what the buzzword is. I think what we're all looking for is the ability to take the screen wherever we are, whenever we are, and say, put something good on. And the system has a reasonably good chance of putting something there that I'm going to be interested in.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, we're so much more than demographics, aren't we? We're humans. We have moods, we have habits, we have all sorts of stuff going on.
So I'll keep it brief so we can keep moving. So I think the most important element when it comes to this technology is really about empowering decision makers inside of the organization. So for companies like CBS, Fox, Time Inc., Meredith, and many others that we work with, we've talked a lot about kind of SVOD, long form content. We find that the highest volume of consumption is also happening in short form. So it's about creating workflows that you can empower decision makers. So for editorial, this means if you have 50 clips about the World Cup, which is starting this week, you need to know which one not just has the most views, but which has the most follow-on views, the most highest retention rate, and therefore is going to drive the most revenue. And then use that to make sure that you're programming it in the right places in your apps, and also to acquire traffic to it if you're using recirculation widgets like ZergNet, Taboola, Outbrain on web and mobile. If you're in product, you want to have a better user experience, whether that's a sticky player on your site or it's having more interactivity in the player. We empower those teams. Or if it's management, it's understanding hey, we made big investments in this type of content. What percent of our viewership against that category and that specific data point is actually performing well? Where should we invest? Where should we divest? So I think there's a lot of very specific ways you can empower decision makers with this technology, and that's really where we're finding the best opportunities. It all ties back to programming and making better utilization of the teams that are there in place. There's no kind of magic bullet that comes from personalization or machine learning.
So I cut the cord about 12 years ago, and so I have Apple TV and Roku and Amazon Fire and everything else, and they all have these personalization engines in it, but none of them really know me, And the other thing is that I have a different interface for each one of those platforms that I have to learn. I'm very good at interface, and I just can't believe how normal people can actually navigate their way through this stuff. I'm also a big believer of serendipity. I mean, I've had television many a times show me something, as you said, woodworking. I saw the history of plumbing, and it was fascinating. And I was and I never would have looked for that. So I really believe in that. I do love the fact that I have all these platforms and I can immediately say that sucks and go to something else. But the thing is just we have to be more kind to the user. We used to think that the TV grid for the cable system was a horrible mess. Well, I think OTT is worse a mess.
So on that note, what do you think we can do to make it less of a mess for normal people?
Well, there are personalization engines that, will go across platforms, and they need to get integrated in. Then there needs to be, like universal remotes, there needs to be a universal interface. So it knows that I was watching Law and Order on Hulu, and so I don't have to buy it on Apple TV. And I also saw the season that was on Netflix. So, I mean, it's insane. So having something that was universal that you would be able to use would be fantastic.
And it's still highly fragmented. So Gabe, Kurt both work heavily in like MSOs, and like there's a lot of like great solutions they deployed there at scale, right? But then you look at broadcasters and publishers who now all have all these OTT apps. Largely, most of those don't have a lot of technologies like we're talking about integrated yet, because there's a lot of fragmentation in the number of devices, number of front-end technologies to enable the UX, number of back-end technologies to enable the transcoding, encoding, delivery of video, and then the ad serving. So there's still kind of very much a lot of ground to go capture here that I think is why we're all here.
Yeah. But I guess, David, you're probably the closest to a universal search thing on this panel. What do you think is the future of solving these problems?
I mean, yeah, obviously it's near and dear to my heart. I think it's two things actually. Universal search is just part of it. I think universal discovery is really like the interface, because universal search presumes that you know what you want to watch and you're just trying to find where it's available. I mean, obviously you're basically pitching our company, which is great. But basically, yeah, putting all of the content into one place where they know what you watch. We know what you watched on Netflix. We know what you watched on Amazon, and can consolidate all of that and actually, I mean, to this question, make a recommendation based off of that. I think, yeah, it hasn't been driven from the consumer experience to date. It's been driven off the business goals of these companies, which, I mean, makes sense.
I mean, how difficult is that challenge to consolidate all that data on, like to have Dewey TV or, Kurt TV, whatever these channels are? Like, because, I mean, obviously there's lots and lots of different challenges around data and GDPR and all sorts of things, but what can we do to deliver that amazing personal experience for people?
But do we even want to? I mean, does it not necessarily hurt the economic foundation on which these shows that we love are being produced? Because at the end of the day, the place, we call it the place, one place, one place, one place. But when we talk about digital media, the place is the media. It's like the newspaper, it's the front page. And we've seen across Europe, by the way, now, in almost every European country, the big broadcasters are coming together and trying to build their own Netflix, quote unquote, and we see that happening in Spain, and we see that happening in the UK, and in the Netherlands. Talpa Networks, basically their idea is that there's only room for one of these big players in a country like the Netherlands and so forth. And then, you know how almost every interface has and CN also has this like kind of carousel on the top and like kind of like some kind of thing? That carousel has the first one, and then there's like the second and third, and maybe then the fourth and fifth are irrelevant. Who gets the first one? How do you decide in what hours of the day which one of these multiple providers get the first one? So I understand, I use the Apple TV app, and actually our company supports several of the ones who are invited to the private API of Apple TV app, which exists on phone and TV, which is basically an attempt to do that, a low ego area where every clip is being promoted, but basically referring back to the original app, so not cannibalizing the media in so many words. But it's extremely problematic. And I think that one other thing that we need to be discussing, and we don't have a panelist on it, and I would love to just look these people in the eye and say, what are you doing, is the people who develop the app stores. Because the LG TV WebOS is a great operating system, and I would never say that before I moved to the States. When I moved here, I used the Netflix, and I used the Hulu, it's so convenient, but to discover a new app, they deliberately make it impossible. They created an app to control the TV. To now make it even easier, they made a little mouse cursor, so I kind of like go and I try to get it, and it's impossible to get anything done, let alone to download an app. There's no keyboard integration, so if I want to do a keyboard, I have to like go with the letters. It's insane. So there is no other conclusion. There has to be one place to make it easy, because we are not able as human beings to manage multiple destinations. But we are, and our phone proves it. On the phone, you have Uber and you have Lyft, and they achieve the same thing, and they look completely different, and the user understands it completely. Which is why I would say that the future, I think, for TV discovery is apps that are driven off the phone. The phone has a great processor, Chromecast, AirPlay, these are great technologies. You can easily stream from the comfort of your couch. The interface is easy, everything is in reach. You can see the different promoted things on your phone. It's cross-integrated with other apps, so you're pre-installed with your Facebook, your LinkedIn, your Instagram, your whatever. And it's an integrated operating system that has everything that I need, and most importantly, the consumer is used to working with multiple destinations on the remote.
So let's throw that open to the rest of the panel then. Like, what do you think who's doing a really good job of TV user interfaces at the moment? Is anyone doing it? And what would be an amazing TV user experience?
Well, as I said, is that if you had a personalization engine that was hooked up to a really good interface, and personalization engines are great, and they bring up a lot of text. This is what's available and that's what's available. But people still go through pictures a lot faster than they go through text. And they also have much better reference base than text. But it would really be a universal personalization engine that comes from Apple or whoever, and then integrated in with a single user interface. And as you said, it knows that I watch that on Hulu, and it knows that I watch that on Netflix, and it knows that I watch that on Amazon Fire. The other problem with all the OTT things is it's not like cable. When something comes on you're not interested in, you switch channels. You can't do that in OTT. If you switch channels, you lose where you are. So there's a lot of things to work out.
Yeah, and I don't think that any of this kind of is going to happen anytime soon, right? I don't see a world where CBS and NBC say, you know what, it's fine. We'll merge our apps together, and our sub fees as individual CBS All Access is going to be fine, distinct from NBC. I just don't see that happening. And in the meantime, there's been heavy investment in two players, right? Hulu and Netflix, in terms of where all the UI, UX, in terms of SVOD has gone, and they really defined the market. But if you're a local television station, right, like you deliver local news, weather, sports, right, maybe some investigative journalism, if you get a user hooked on two of those types of content, then you're going to build a loyal audience member. So there's not that much that needs to be done to build that. And sure, it could come from the phone, it could originate there, but we're going to continue to live in a fragmented kind of environment for at least the next couple of years, or other mergers like AT&T, Time Warner, right? Kind of bring a lot of things under certain ecosystems. So I think that's where having great experiences inside of each of these applications is so important.
I would also say, I'm not a UI, UX guy, but I can say that my last company, we supported big storefronts. No good deed goes unpunished in the UI UX business, because it's a thankless thing. It's really complicated. Just the back office stuff, the CRMs, the different APIs you have to do, the DRM, the security. Look, when you're a studio and you're a content guy, what they're dealing with right now is that, can you protect the content and do you pay your bills, right? That's kind of what they're looking for. So all that's really, really important. We talked yesterday a little bit about, I think it was Seth, about scale, right? What's scale? Scale is also speed. Netflix is delivering 700 original titles this year, 700 original programs. There's no upfront anymore. It's just a constant spigot that's going on. So you need a UI that can deal with change requests, that can deal with updating things. And I think that's what you also start to see is just a greater kind of, again, it's a boring subject, but it's just how you get through those change requests, how you can be nimble, how you can propagate content faster. That's what's happening, right? So if you're a cable guy, you want to make sure you have Game of Thrones on demand at 9 o'clock, just like HBO Now does. And that doesn't exist. Right? So the UIs have to also be in measure with the capabilities of the system. If you have a UI that only carousels one piece of artwork, don't make 5 recommendations. Right? So, it doesn't scale videos. So all these things are kind of coming, I think. And the other part is, now we'll get back to it, is AI. AI right now is in the infant stages. AI can't read. Right? AI can triangulate this word and that word, but again, I think someone mentioned, content is king, context wears the crown. Right? So that's kind of where it'll become better as time goes on with personalization, I think, too.
And I think when it comes to UIs, one of the additional challenges, and you kind of alluded to this, is, I mean, you're saying you have different streaming boxes, but in the past there was just people watched on their TV and they had their TV guide, whereas now people are watching on their phones, on their laptops, on their, on their 10-foot experience. And that's just a new challenge for UI designers to figure out an interface, like even let's pick Netflix, for example. Like the Netflix interface needs to effectively look the same on all these different devices, but I mean, the modes of input, you have a remote, you have your thumb on your phone, you have a mouse and a keyboard, and so it's just a whole extra layer of complexity when trying to make something universal that is easy for people to use.
Yeah, my bugbear with the Netflix user interface, and I watch a lot of Netflix and I love it, but it's, if I watch like 5 seconds of something and then I don't watch it, it still shows up as recently watched. It still somehow informs their impression of me, and that really bugs me.
Especially if it's an original.
That's their learn actions. They started, when does life begin? Someone in Netflix decided that.
One of the things that I've noticed, there's been a lot of talk about the voice interface and voice as your way of interacting with these devices. And I go back to thinking about a picture's worth 1,000 words. So we're all enamored with this idea, right? But I have an LG TV with the magic remote. And for certain things, I would far prefer to take that remote and point at the screen to do simple things rather than to speak to my device. And it could be because I'm in an environment with my family and I don't want to be talking at my TV because it seems a little bit antisocial. It's almost like putting on the 3D glasses when 3D was the big thing. It's a bit antisocial. So I think when we talk about the future of UI, UX, I think it's going to be a combination of things. It's going to be, we all know that probably at least 50% of communication is body language, right? Our facial expressions and that kind of thing. And so likes and dislikes and the user interface's ability to understand us better, it's going to be a combination of voice and visual, and a manual interface when we want that.
So, voice for me has been I think it's an amazing way to interact with things. Again, TV used to be the simplest user interface in the world. You just turn it on and it's there. You had a channel changer and you changed it. The content was limited, but it was very simple. And we've complicated the hell out of it, really. But voice, when I got the Amazon Echo, and I started talking to Alexa, and that just changed my world. That is amazing. Now sometimes, and I have one in the office and I have a colleague called Alexi, so that really gets very, very confusing. But I think it's a really, again, it's a simple, what's more personal than your voice, right?
What's beautiful about that, though, is that it gave you an API into the world. And I think that's a big difference, because we're talking about how will UI consolidate? How will we get a familiar experience across different properties? And I think it's so unlikely that we'll be able to create that kind of consolidation, or it's even worth it. Even Hearst or Condé Nast, they're not consolidating even their fashion brands. Because it makes sense to keep them as separate brands. They're not issuing a book now. They're still issuing separate publications and separate URLs. So how do we do it without consolidation? I think it's with a more complex world of APIs, which is something to think about, because if you think the ecosystem is not layered enough right now, and gaming is a good analogy where it became that way. So Facebook in the beginning, you would see Flash games on Facebook. Gaming on Facebook is so big. And then the next stage was Facebook offered a whole set of achievement centers and things like that. So they were kind of realizing that mobile apps are happening, so let's give a set of APIs to support those games. And then last, the games that really succeed, the Candy Crushes of the world, use Facebook as a context highway for you to interact with your friends in a good way and keep it as a very slim API, to the point that Facebook deleted the gaming API and just kept that kind of relationship between people. And we're seeing the same thing in media. Today, if you're looking at Facebook, people see it as a destination in a similar way that we did with Flash games. And okay, it's a big market and it's a media play, so I understand that they want to play there. And then the next thing that's going to have to happen, or that has happened, they opened the graph. So the graph let us put things on the graph, and as third parties create there. But I think when Facebook offers recommendation context, they have the ability to do that better than anyone in that sense. When they offer those APIs outwards, we'll be able to standardize those experiences across independent media platforms, so they can be a big enabler to what's going to happen.
I have some very strong views in this topic. So I strongly disagree. With Facebook, if you go back to January, they changed their algorithm. So now as a publisher, right, who if you had a large organic audience that you built on Facebook, and you turn that into a revenue stream, that's largely changed, dramatically so for 95% of publishers. So that business has basically, just like it did in the social gaming space, gone away. And so although they definitely do have the best technology and the best resources, if you're a media company and you're looking at rights holders and rights management and distribution and windowing, which is the core tenets of media, then to build a profitable business, you cannot rely on Facebook. It's a
No, but then
distribution
we were in
window.
total agreement. I'm saying exactly the same thing. I'm just saying that when you want to standard, so when you use Facebook as your media, you can't trust it. It's not your friend in that sense. Right. And they have been trying to create an ecosystem around it, and they've also been good to their publishers, but they hold the news feed. You're so susceptible. When you watch The Voice, they're going to promote the competing show on the parallel channel because it's contextual. So
as they start to pay for content, and the way that they and YouTube got away with it is because piracy was enabled. They got away with it through their trademark law and that suit with Viacom. Yeah. Everyone had to pay, essentially participate. And building windows and building great user experiences to compete with those platforms is difficult. But if you're a rights holder, and this is very important when it comes to voice too, if you're asking Alexa or asking Google for, hey, show me the World Cup, they're going to give you one answer.
Yeah.
So that one answer greatly limits the ability for NBC Sports, CBS Sports, Fox Sports to compete, right? ESPN to compete.
It kills SEO.
And so it's we have to be very careful as media companies about how we participate and work with these essentially gateholders, right? And so, yeah, I think you just need to be very careful. And it gets back to, traditional media tenets of where do you window content and how do you manage it?
Yeah, and to just complete the point, so when they made that announcement to reduce the place of the publishers on the Facebook platform, they also said that we want to go back to our core, which is communication between people. And that's exactly the extent of my point, that if we leverage Facebook as an API, the one that it should be, it would provide a platform for contextual recommendation between us, not from them. So if you were my Facebook friend and I watch something and I let you know of that, or you could see what I have been watching, I'm the most trusted source because maybe, like they said, it has nothing to do with your preference. Because one other interesting thing that happened with content now that there's so much of it in the past 2 years, like $16 billion, it's like 3 times the UN budget per year was thrown into content, and we have so much scripted because of it, because who can figure out what to watch even? The water cooler talk is almost gone. It reduced dramatically, and that was one of the good things about TV. So I think we're going to find ways, when we're talking about recommendations, one of the great benefits that we can bring to make the industry stronger is to bring back the water cooler talk. And how will we bring back the water cooler talk? We'll bring it back by creating pockets of people that know each other, that are watching the same thing, and they can talk about it.
One weekly releases instead of just binge watching, and certain OTT players that are really successful, like Crunchyroll and Verve and others that are smaller competitors to Netflix have done that, as have companies like Fox and other obviously Donald Glover has been very public about how he thinks that Atlanta should be watched weekly, not as a binge.
But I mean, I would never take Facebook recommendations from friends on Facebook about what to watch as a TV discovery mechanism. If it's like, oh, your cousin watched this, I'm like, I don't care. But what is interesting is how does content discovery actually happen for everyone up here at the moment? What was the last show that you watched based on somebody's recommendation? What happened to make you watch that show? What was the tipping point?
I think there's a certain number of times that you need to be hit with a message. I mean, marketers know this, but I think it's also true when it comes to shows. I started watching Wild Wild Country on the weekend. Very good.
It's good.
But I'd heard it multiple times. I'd heard on podcasts people talk about it in different places. And then I just ran into a friend on the weekend and he was just telling me about it. But I felt like that was probably the 6th time I'd heard about it. And that was the threshold for me where I was like, okay, now I'm actually going to go watch it.
Your threshold is 6 times from a trusted source.
Yeah, so if you say a show 6 times to me, I'll watch it.
What about you, Dewey?
Yeah, I was going to say it's really personal conversations that I have with friends. Facebook, I wouldn't take the recommendation because I'd always think that Facebook stuck that in there. Yeah. So when I sit with personal friends and they say, oh, did you see this and that? Then I'll go search it out. And I'll actually go to all the platforms and search it out so I don't have to pay for it.
Yeah, that's good.
Would you like to say?
Well, I would say what does it for me is the poster art. Right? I mean, regardless of it, where am I being grabbed? That's a big thing. Again, boring, blocking and tackling. Get the right poster art justification up there. What does that look like? You'll see that all the time when something hit a theatrical release. It happened with 13 Hours. 13 Hours Now the guy that's doing the Jack Ryan on Amazon, his name's John Krasinski. Is it? So in the beginning, he was, the poster art when they came out was a silhouette of a bunch of men. They saw a lot of buzz from him and how he stood out. When it hit the VOD window, we're talking about windowing, he's on the poster art. It's just him, right? So I personally, maybe I'm somewhat Pavlovian, I just look at what's in front of me, right? So part of it's that, what grabs my attention to go more. I'd be curious to know, I think the average viewing time on Netflix is like 2 hours, but just anecdotally, how much just in this group is spent looking for stuff as opposed to watching stuff.
It's 36 minutes a day on average for American people. 36 minutes a day browsing for content. I just saw that last week. I was shocked. 36 minutes a day. I calculated it's like years of your life, like at the end of the day. Yeah, watching. But it happens. You're just like, oh, there isn't a new episode of this. Okay, so what am I going to watch? And you just go click, click, click. I have a friend. Sorry.
Gabriel, it's interesting that you mentioned the poster art because I was in a seminar recently, and they were talking about the amount of metadata that Netflix captures for any particular piece of content. And, it's way over 1,000 pieces of metadata. And one of the pieces are multiple posters for the same content. And they will understand you demographically, age-wise or whatever, and they'll look for whether or not the poster is going to appeal to you, which poster is the optimal one to put in front of you, which is interesting. Personally, I don't generally go for the poster. What I do is I'll look at third-party things, and if I'm thinking about a binge, I'll look for things that might work for me and my wife because we'd like to watch something together. If it's just for me, I'll go to places like Metacritic, and I'll just kind of scan through the top 100 or whatever shows and say, oh, that looks good, and then I'll go try one episode. And if it's good, I'll go on it. But which is strange, right? Because I have to go totally out of the context of the viewing experience to go and do this. It's almost like it feels like this project, right? To come up with what's my next thing.
Right.
Field, what about you? What was the last thing that you discovered, and how did you discover it?
Very similar to my friend here. Personal recommendations, yeah, almost always, right? And I think, also finding things on social, right, can be really effective, but I rarely watch it on social.
Right. Okay. So what's social? When you say finding things on social, is that
Twitter.
Twitter.
Yeah.
So Twitter, like being the water cooler, that you don't agree? Do you think it's not the water cooler?
No. Well, it's a social thing. For us, we have a group of friends on WhatsApp, which is why I think...
So WhatsApp for you
WhatsApp,
is...
it's just a...
Or GroupMe is another one.
Yeah, I guess parents have a lot of WhatsApp because of the school, because of the whatever, so that like a lot of the information flows there. So I really think that personal recommendation is like also on this panel. It's like clearly 10 clicks above any other mechanism. So I really believe in that. So
I guess I'll ask one more question before I open it up to the room. But why is personalization so difficult to implement for content companies right now? And I guess, Kurt, you can answer that one, or anyone else.
So for companies, personalization in general, it means so many different things to so many different people. And I think there's no standard ways of creating personalized experiences. I look at the market today, and I think about all of the different platforms for video delivery, and each platform is a custom silo, right? Every provider of video has built a system from the ground up. And when they want to add in the latest AI capabilities for personal recommendation, when they want to create an API and they get access to some social media information and they want to bring it in, that's not transportable from one platform to the next. And so the industry as a whole has a problem, right? It can't accelerate with these new capabilities because it doesn't have the scale economies that come from what I would consider to be an open platform approach. It's a lot of closed platforms, and everybody's kind of trying to reinvent the wheel in each one of their separate environments.
So none of our clients, for example, the folks up here have the size and scale of, say, a Netflix or a Google or a Facebook. So there's kind of proven strategies, though, for how you execute this. So the way that we do it is we'll set up a common data model. So kind of data ingest, data structuring, taxonomy creation, business rule creation. The second component is user experience. So it's all about essentially interactivity in the player, improving the UI, UX, could be SVOD, but we also touch a lot of web and mobile, as I mentioned. And then the final piece is insights. So you essentially are able to take action from the data that you derive from the way that you implement that. And what it does, it creates kind of a feedback loop that then you can begin to iterate and test and run supervised learning experience on top of that. But the most important thing, in our opinion, again, goes back to empowering decision makers. So we enable a business rules engine sitting on top of that.
Does that take into account all sorts of things like location for people if they're watching on mobile, like context, all the context?
It does, yes. We have to do it now. It depends if you're in US or if it's European traffic, right? Because we're now GDPR compliant. Yes, it would, in an anonymized fashion, take into account device, operating system, geolocation, the content you're watching, time of day, and those factors are actually often data points that we find. Team members, editorial team members don't know when to publish their newsletters, don't know when to push content. And so when they see those kind of spikes, those heat maps, as we call them, then you can actually make better decisions from that.
And it's still the same set of challenges that I had when I was doing live sports TV, like almost like 16 years ago at this point. It was like, okay, what am I showing this audience for when they want to watch at this time?
Traditional research and programming.
Exactly. It's the same stuff. What about you, Gabriel?
Well, I think you're spot on what you were just saying about insights, and that's what it's all about. Again, we do 2 billion recommendations a day. We're very platform aware. We do it in all these different languages, and we are at the second inning of this, and now it's about now what? I go back to that again. It's about how do you follow the life of that recommendation and how you start setting up learn actions. And you're totally on that. That's what it's really all about. That's when personalization will start to happen once we on the front end set up the right learning. That's really, really important. So I think you'll see it's happening. Some of it is just, and you're in the paid TV market, some of the problems is you have 20-year-old set-top boxes that just won't die. Right? I mean, and your watch has more processing capability than that box, right? But it's just the way it is. So now you're seeing in 5 years, in like a 5-year period, what we've seen with the meteoric rise of everything going on. I think it's happening. A lot of it's just burdened by legacy, And we do mobile. We just launched 30 million mobile devices in India, all doing personalized recommendation in 8 different dialects, right? So it's
how many
it's
different handsets?
How many different?
Like types of handsets, like how many different devices?
The different handsets, all manner of devices with different SKUs and all that to be able to handle all that and be able to be platform aware. Yeah.
That's a big challenge.
And maybe to touch on legacy, which is an interesting point, I think also it will require a process because personalization is almost, because the size of the catalog is the main issue, and it's almost against the DNA of any broadcast company that had a live play, because if you think about primetime 5 days a week, it doesn't work on being similar to one another. The assumption was to get the biggest amount of audience, I have to make programming that's quite different from one day to another. 2 reality shows, 1 cooking show, 1 scripted or whatever. So the whole way catalogs have been built have been to be with different pieces with a big diversity from one another, which is why I think as an in-stream play, the broadcast businesses that are succeeding in this create long-tail properties. So they go into like a cooking property or vertical or like a fashion or like a economic news vertical. And those are very successful because they create the personalization by committing to creating a pocket of content, and they create a business strategy behind it.
And a community and a fan base, right?
And a community and a fan base. And then maybe in the future they can consolidate it all and have a big enough catalog and content play that would support it in the sense.
I think it's somewhat ironic that, just arguably our business has been affected by disruption more than anything, but it's also interesting that, like, when everybody checked out a hotel, what are you going to get besides your bill? Maybe you already got it, right? How do we do? Right? We don't do that. That's what we're trying to do, right? That's what we're trying to do, and I think we'll get there.
I want to just open up to questions. I think there's a lady over there with the question box. Yes, I'm going to call
I have a question. So, legacy issues aside, in an environment now where we have so many OTT or IP-enabled platforms, are any of you doing anything with more interactivity in mind? When I think of sort of best of across platforms, I love that on Pandora I can select a thumbs up or thumbs down, and if I thumbs down it, I don't hear that song again. Or I had to write these down. On Xbox, my children, they sign in different usernames so it knows how many points they have in Fortnite, for instance. Or, even cable, where I can favorites my linear channels so I can quickly access where they don't have to memorize the channel numbers. Why aren't we seeing more of that in recommendations as opposed to you just having to guess that because I watched 10 minutes of a video, I actually liked it? I might not have even liked that video.
Well, Netflix used to do that. I mean, they used to have a thumbs up and thumbs down in a rating system. And I think Netflix got to know me better than it does now.
So we integrated thumbs up, thumbs down, and skip players through our API into like a lot of open video players. So just go to AccuWeather.com or go to Billboard, or I can show you like a couple hundred websites that have it. It's not YouTube, right? So you're not going to see it everywhere, but we have done that. But it's a tricky thing to do, like at scale, right? It's a tricky thing to do in SVOD environments. I think everyone can attest to. And I think part of the issue is that most of the online video viewing is on Snapchat, Instagram, YouTube, and Facebook. A lot of that content is not, I think, what you're referring to, necessarily like cable or kind of professionally produced content. Dissing content on those platforms. A lot of amazing content there. But I think as windowing begins to get more sophisticated in terms of what content goes where, and there's better user experiences on these kind of premium environments, we'll see more of that.
Alan, you've got the question
Yeah,
box.
okay, so first up, Hulu Live TV is doing just what you asked. They just started rolling it out this month, where you can tell them, I don't want it, you recommended this, I don't want to see it anymore. So the question though is, so Netflix is spending $8 billion this year on what they say is 700 original series, probably closer to 100 or 200. Now, while they're spending $2 billion on marketing, they're still relying really heavily on that recommendation engine in their algorithm to make that $8 billion investment work. Given Alexa Show Me Stranger Things and Comcast integration and all that, how risky is that? Like, is it an $8 million, is it worth risking $8 billion just on that recommendation engine and algorithm?
Well, as Netflix expands so much, it's almost like in Facebook, you don't know the reality that somebody else is seeing. So I just read an article about Netflix dealing with the point of content being lost. Like, I don't know, maybe you wrote it? No, I don't know. Possibly. I can't recall. But there was a piece about content being lost. But then, if I watched on Amazon Prime one cooking show, my entire thing is an amount of cooking shows you can't believe I didn't even know existed. So they need that ammunition to paint somebody's world blue or red or white. So I think that if you looked at it as an entire catalog as a normal bell curve kind of middle of the range kind of guy that watches House of Cards and The Crown and the hit shows, the primetime shows, then maybe there's too much content. But I think that more people than I know of, I'm guessing, I don't know the answer, but I'm guessing that more people than I can think of are experiencing a very thematic, because of recommendation, a very thematic experience that requires that much content, because otherwise you can't create all these different profiles.
But however, one thing I really love about Netflix is that shows get made that maybe would not have get green light before. Like Narcos being one of the #1 shows in the US, subtitled.
I'm just wondering, they're expanding the number of originals 20-fold, whatever it is. So.
But it's about taking those risks and seeing what lands. And I think that's really, really brave. Yeah.
The question there has to do with also, EBITDA and other questions we're not talking about right now, but that's beside the point. Like if it's sustainable.
We also don't know what they're using as a success measure, right? So if I look at that spend, maybe what they're trying to do is prevent churn, right? With fresh content coming out all the time, it's not knowing exactly what show it is that I'm going to watch. It's just the simple fact that I'm going to have a lot of really cool, interesting options coming forward. And maybe that's the message. And maybe that's why you said, not 700 shows, but really 150, because what Netflix wants the subscriber to know is there's a lot, right?
Well,
bigger numbers are better.
A lot of those are just overseas shows that are new to the U.S. or something.
It's an illusion of a lot. Right. Comcast library is multiple times bigger than Netflix library by a factor of not even close. But it's the UI, right? I have legacy pay TV. I won't mention their names, and I have their OTT. It's fine. On the legacy, I'm like, man, you guys are daring me to watch television. You're like, go find it. I dare you. Go find it. It's channel map somewhere. You'll figure out 6 sausages down, right? I mean, whatever.
I think it's a bit of an issue of there's control and internationalization in that too. Control being if they're licensing from a studio, they have to go renegotiate the hours. If it's their own original content, then they have that in perpetuity, which then also if they own it, they can internationalize that right away without having to go region by region and just sort of one shot and be done.
Clayton, you have a question?
Thank you. Clayton Banks, Silicon Harlem, and also Fortnite in the Heights, by the way. So I had a question sort of getting back to the theme of your panel, unity and diversity. I'm curious if you have thoughts about how personalization can actually cause polarization. We've seen it with even with our government in terms of hacking and things of that nature. And also I think it manifests in a way that I may not ever hear a story that's covering an issue that I just don't watch normally, where I would actually love that show or that episode of something. So I'm curious, are we working towards that? Is the diversity going to be helpful in bridging that? And Gabriel, maybe you can speak to that. And from a UX perspective, how much feedback are we getting from people, like the users, to say what they like in a UX? I'm curious if that's an exercise, so maybe we can address those issues.
Well, I think in terms of diversity, I think you make a good point. People are, will start to go in their own silos to a certain extent. But then you look at it in terms of diversity, think about the amount of foreign content or international content we're probably already starting to watch. There's a show I watch that's out of Israel, and I've noticed that the first season was all subtitles. Now, the core characters are, they're dubbing it in English. Just the core characters, right? So, if you're a translation person right now in this world, you can make a lot of money because that's what's happening. They're just all, so I think diversity in terms of the pollination of other content will happen, but I think you make a very, very good point. And this gets back to more the societal aspects of algorithms, right? And facial recognition and things like that, that there are just biases put into them, which is, I think, a very problematic thing, actually.
And as far as user feedback on UX and what have you, I mean, I was just with CNN and on 32 platforms. My biggest problem was trying to get that branded experience to be the same across all those platforms. But we got a ton of user feedback all the time, written and also through technology. Our problem is that there's a lot of people out there that hated CNN. So they would write a lot of shitty stuff about the UX just because they don't like our politics, So it's an interesting thing. But there's actually companies that filter that stuff out. So it's pretty interesting.
And there's another point, I think, around personalization and loss of the water cooler talk. I remember a couple years ago I was in Singapore and I met the MDA. They fund all the broadcasters of Singapore basically with government money. And I asked why, and they explained it's because they felt that primetime TV in a country that's a melting pot of different cultures, it creates unity because they have a common agenda, so to speak. And TV gave us that, and a daily edition, and it gave us, in a country that has many immigrants and different cultures, I think that gave you like a common context, and I think a common context gets lost when it's so personalized. And then also I think that you're stuck within your own interest realm, because if open internet is an opportunity to learn new things, it's an open to access information and new thought in a world of hyper-personalization based on algorithms and so forth, you're kind of stuck within your own line of thinking. And if popular culture had a role or a play in evolving us and taking us forward, it might be a jeopardy when you're basically given your comfort zone, because basically we're talking about the currency of convenience. If it's 1 click or 5 clicks or 6 clicks, we're getting lazier and willing to pay to be lazier in that sense. I just had a conversation with someone from one of the network tech talking about how he would wait 3 days so that advertising would skip by itself and you didn't have to click forward. And I thought to myself, God, I mean, like, it's convenience. It's so expensive, and people are willing to spend for it. And then if you're not taking it out of your comfort zone, then on the one hand, we canceled a common agenda, but now we're also not pushing ourselves forward in some way. And I mean, without going into politics, we felt that before the election, what personalization can make you think that's going to happen, and then see how reality is completely different because you've just been in your own little social bubble.
Yeah, and, final thoughts?
The media influences our decision making, right? On the diversity side, it really comes down to the content creators, right? Producing content on both sides. So we find that USA Today is like a national newspaper that we think does a very good job of this as a client. They're very focused on this around the midterm elections coming up. But when you look at like Facebook, for example, so I recommend to everyone, don't get your news from Facebook, that their platform can be bought, right? So you can buy ads and target people in certain psychographic profiles. And so until that's regulated in a way that's very similar to the way that television advertising is regulated, it remains kind of an open question in terms of, you know, what you're seeing and why. And it really creates these hyper polarized kind of bubbles where you really don't know what everyone next to you is seeing on that platform. We're seeing entirely different ads, entirely different content, and it's really pay to play predominantly, especially after the changes in January. So I think it ultimately comes down to content creators and then finding ways to make sure that we're paying for the content in some way, shape, or form through ads or subscription.
Well, I think that's the perfect place to leave it, guys. Thank you very much, all 6 of you, for taking part in this very, very good panel. Some brilliant expertise up here. I know everyone's keen to get to lunch, so we'll leave it there. And thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Claire.